Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to CFPR seminar series. And so today, we are very happy to have Dr. Xiaochen to share with us her work on migration and marriage timing in Indonesia with a dynamic model. And so specifically, Dr. Xiaochen is a research fellow at Asia Competitiveness Institute, the Kuan School of Public Policy. She obtained her PhD in economics from the US. Yeah. And so Dr. Bian's work has been on the role of the informal sector of Indonesian labor market, like people's transition decisions between the formal and the informal sectors. And also she's interested in conduct some research on gig economy in Singapore. And of course, on relevant to today's topic on the labor markets and the marriage markets behavior of young Indonesians after the compulsory education level, given their migration experience in the early childhood. And so without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Bian.
Okay, so thank you guys so much for joining me here today. So before I start my presentation, I would like to take the chance to say.
Sorry.
Yes, please.
One logistic detail, and so still following the convention of CFPR seminars, we will hold back our comments and questions along the way, and we let Dr. Bian to finish her presentation first, and then if you feel that you want to ask a question, just tap in the chat box and saying that I have a question, and then after the presentation is finished, we can just ask her, Dr. Bian, to address those questions. All right. Okay. I'm so sorry, and please.
Sorry to interrupt you. Yeah. So as I was saying, I would like to take the chance to say thank you to CFPR and Prof. Yong for supporting me during the last 3 years for this project. I would also like to thank Zhu for organizing the lunchtime series as always, and thank Prof. Muzung for chairing this session, as well as Prof. Haoming and Prof. Nina for joining me and giving comments here. So all the results I'm going to show you is still at the very preliminary stage. Therefore, all the credits goes to my co-author, and all the errors and mistakes are mine and mine alone. So with that being said, any comments, criticism, and suggestion are more than welcome. So as suggested by the title, our paper is trying to measure the impact of having migration experience in early teens on people's marriage decision using data from Indonesia. So the first concern I would like to address is why do we want to ask those questions in the context of Indonesia? So first of all, Indonesia is of great relevance to the remaining of the world because it's the world's fourth most populous country, following China, India, and United States. In fact, by 2016, it has a population of more than 261 million people, making it the world's most populous Muslim majority countries. And the more determine the reason of why we chosen Indonesia as our target is because Indonesia has this excellent data that follows a representative sample of individual for more than 20 years, and it has complete migration history as well as marriage history, which allow us to use a duration model to capture a richer description of economic behavior. So why, as non-economics, we would be interested in marriage timing? This is because marriage is one of the most important decisions for young adults. Not only that, marriage timing can also affect people's labor market decisions as well as education decisions as well. But most of the current studies focuses on age of getting married for the first time. As for how long the marriage will last, and if people get divorced or widowed, how long it will take them to re-enter the next marriage is still an open question. But with our data, we are able to look at those effects as well. So our paper only focuses on internal migration. We exclude all the international migrants from Indonesia. So some may have concern that this is going to be problematic. However, even though Indonesia has a long history of being the main origin country for international migration in the Southeast Asian region, the number of internal migration still outstrips the number of international migrants. According to the United States, the Department of Economic and Social Affairs reports that in 2017, the international migrants from Indonesia is about 4.5 million. At the same time, if we use the Indonesia 2010 census, then the internal migration would be at least 9.8 million, because there they define internal migrants as people who reported that prior to 2010, they have moved at least once during the last 5 years. So the next concern is whether whether internal migration will affect people's decision as much as international migrants. Well, the perceived fact is that in Indonesia, they have more than 200 ethnic groups and more than 300 local languages. So the internal migrants may just feel as much as the international migrants when they move into a new place. They have, especially if you have to move out of your hometown at very early stage, then you have to say goodbye to all of your friends, and you have to start living in a new place where everyone speaks different language and everyone has different social norm and cultural behaviors according to their ethnic groups. So this is why we are expecting effects of migration in the early teens. The other paper that talks about migration and people's behavior is the one published of Yao Lu 2010 paper, and it was published in Social Science and Medicine. And in their paper, she finds that rural urban migrants increases the risk of psychological disorder as measured by depressive symptoms. But the results also suggest that in the middle term, migration experience had little impacts on people's physical or mental health. The other very similar papers to ours is Prof. Young and Prof. Mu's paper, 2020 paper. In their paper, they were using data from China, and then they find that compared to rural locals, rural migrants marry much later. But we have to keep in mind that we cannot simply apply whatever results we get from China to Indonesia, since those two countries have very different setting with respect to internal migration. So in China, we have this hukou system, which is discouraging people from moving across the cities. And also in China, men are expected to have a house before they can get married, and the housing price in China is so expensive that you can expect migrants, especially those who migrate out of rural area, have to wait a little bit longer until they have enough money to get married. But those two channels in Indonesia is less severe because, firstly, Indonesia has a lot of those government-initiated transmigration plans, which are targeted to moving people out of the Java area. And they provide financial support for people who are moving. So unlike discouraging people from moving in Indonesia, government is trying to help people to move. And also the housing price in Indonesia is not as much as expensive as in China. So that's why we may expect different impacts of migration on marriage decisions. So before I lost your attention, this is what we're doing in our paper. So our paper measures the impact of the following individual characteristics on marriage decisions. Firstly, we study whether having migration experience in early teens will affect people's decision differently. So we have 3 different definitions of migration experience. Later, we will talk about it in more details. Also, we trying to see whether people with rural origin compared to people with urban origin will have different marriage timing, and whether living in the rural area or in the urban area in the last year will affect people's decision differently. Lastly, we also conduct a study on whether parents' education will affect people's marriage decision differently. So this is the preview of our findings. What we find is that female urban rural teenage migrants on average get married for the first time about 0.2 years earlier than non-migrants. And also, if they get married, their marriage tends to last 0.7 years longer. So if we say the traditional female view of marriage timing is getting married earlier and committed to the same marriage longer, then our findings suggesting that for female, having urban-rural migration experience in the early teens will make them have more traditional view of marriage. So we also find that respondent with rural origins is about 5% younger than those with urban origins when they get married for the first time, regardless of the gender. And we find that while the origin can predict the speed of re-entering a new marriage for male respondent, for female respondent, how fast they will enter the next marriage depends on their location type of the most recent place. We also find that compared to migrant status, the location type of the residence place of age 12, as well as their origin, their residence location in the last year, will have greater impact on the average expected duration of the never married spell, meaning how long you will stay single before you get married for the first time, as well as the average expected duration of how long you will stay divorced or widowed before you remarry. So we also find that compared to migrant status and residence location type, rural versus city, parents' education level have greater impact on the average expected duration of marriages. Meaning if we want to see how long a typical marriage will last, we should focus on parents' education level. And lastly, we find that compared to duration model, the propensity score matching method is more likely to claim statistically significant impact of the variables of interest. And later we will explain in details why we prefer duration model over propensity score matching if we're looking at marriage timing. So few things about the data we're using. So as mentioned, this is we're using Indonesia Family Life Survey data. So IFRS follows a sample of households representing 83% of the Indonesian population living in 13 of the 26 provinces. So those 13 provinces are the most populous one. And our sample consists of males and females about 15 years old and below 16 years old. With that being said, that means we do exclude observations who get married for the first time before age 15. Fortunately, those observations only take a minimal amount in our sample, so we don't need to worry too much about them. And we also, one thing I would like to stress is the one thing that makes IFLA so unique in Southeast Asia is because it has this really low attrition rate. As mentioned, it follows the household for more than 20 years. But as you can see, as in the last wave, which was conducted in the 2014 and early 2015, that's roughly about 21 years later of the first wave, which is in 1993. They still managed to contact more than 80% of the original households. So that's that means like we don't need to worry about data attrition there so much. Now I would like to talk about the methodology. But as promised, before I talk about the duration model, I would like to discuss why the reasons why we prefer duration model than propensity score matching when we were looking at the marriage timing problem. So let's just set up the research question in under the framework of propensity score matching. For ease of explanation, let's focus on the impact of migration experience at age 12 first. So the treatment, as mentioned, we have 3 definitions. The first definition is if someone were born in rural area and by age 12, he or she moved to urban area, or someone was born in urban area, but by age of 12, he or she already moved to a rural area, then we will consider them as rural urban migrants. And those people who were born at rural area and stay at rural area until age 12 will be considered as non-migrants. The same goes with those whose birthplace and residence location at age 12 are all urban area, then they were still non-migrants. The second definition of the migration experience at age 12 is if the birthplace and the age 12 location is in 2 different counties, then we will consider them as having migration experience by age of 12. Lastly, if the birthplace and age 12 location is in 2 different provinces, we will consider them as migrants. So when we were trying to study the impact of migration experience on the marriage decision, the corresponding outcome is firstly, the age of getting married for the first time. Second, how long the marriage will last. And lastly, how long the divorce or widowed spell will last. So the biggest problem with propensity score matching is in effect that it cannot deal with right-centered observations. So what are right-centered observations? Here, let's use the age of getting married for the first time as an example. So if I want to study the impact on age of getting married for the first time, then I have to deal with the observations who by the end of the survey has not yet married. So for those type of so-called right-centered observation, their outcome variable is not well defined. Because they have never married. So how could I know what's their age of getting married for the first time, right? So here I'm going to use this example to show you why it will be a problem if we just use the age when they were last observed in the data. So as mentioned, let's just assume there were like 2 individuals, individual A and B. Individual A is a migrant and individual B is a non-migrant. And both of them were last observed in the data at age 18. And let's say we know that in effect, migration status, the treatment, is going to increase the age of getting married for the first time. So the actual age of getting married for individual A would be, say, 25 years old, while for individual B, who's a non-migrant, his actual age of getting married is 19 years. So if we're using the age at the end of the survey for both of them as the outcome variable, the measurement error for individual A is 25 years minus 18 years, 7 years. But the measurement error for individual B is 1. But as you can see, the measurement error here is correlated with the assignment of the treatment. If we're going to use age at the end of the survey as our outcome variable. So if this is true, that means when we're using age at the end of the survey as our outcome variable, we will violate the most fundamental assumption required by propensity score matching. That is the conditional independence assumption. And the problem is there's no way we can observe the actual age of getting married, right? So the measurement error is something unobserved. That means there are some unobserved individual characteristics that is correlated with the treatment. Hence, if we're going to study the impact, especially the age of getting married, then using propensity score matching is not a good idea. So how can we deal with those individuals? The only alternative left is just to exclude them from the sample. It is kind of okay if we say, let's just focus on those who has married by the end of the survey. But later, if we want to study the impact on the length of the marriage, how long a marriage will last, then the right sense observation refers to those people who, by the end of the survey, they were still married. So then if we're going to exclude those samples, we're going to lose a lot of attrition, and we're not even sure whether this will lead us to the same conclusion. So that's why we believe using duration model is more appropriate here if we were focusing on the timing. So now let's talk about duration model itself. So the first step of a duration model is to estimate a logic function representing the log odds ratio, representing the Hertz function of making a transition. So here, let's use the example of getting married for the first time, the age of getting married for the first time as an example. So here, the outcome variable is whether this individual is still unmarried or he get married for the first time. So then here, his outcome is just like a bunch of 0 and 1s. For those right-sensitive observations, his outcome variable across all of those years is just like a series of 1s. For those who actually get married before the end of the survey, his outcome is 0, 0, 0, and 1 at the year when he actually transit out of the never married spell. So in the X, conditional vectors, we include father's education, mother's education, age, location type of the residence location in the last year, location type of residence location at age 12, which we refer to as the origin place. And we also include their migrant status at age 12. So running the logic model, we can get the estimates for this hazard function. After we get the estimated beta, all we need to do is plug them back to the hazard rate function. Then we know the probability of getting out of the never married spell in each year. So once I know the hazard rates, then for me to calculate the expected age, I just need to use this equation. So now let me explain a little bit about what does this equation mean. So as mentioned, our data started at age 15. So that's why here it's like t equals to 15. But also, say if we want to know the probability of someone getting married at age 16, that means firstly, he has to stay unmarried in the first 2 years. Namely, this 1 minus hazard, right? This means the transition doesn't happen. He stays unmarried in the first T minus years. And in year T, he transit out of the never married spell, meaning he get married. So this part is going to be its probability of getting married at age T. Using this one times the T itself, we can get the expected age of getting married for individual I, given his individual characteristics. So we do this for every individual in the sample. Then we can have the average expected duration for the population. So now, how could we study the impact of being a migrant at age 12 versus being a non-migrant at age 12? You do is just to calculate the average expected duration of the population, given everyone are non-migrants, versus the case when everyone is rural urban teenage migrants. And then after we calculate the average expected duration of the population under those two scenarios, by simple math, we can calculate the difference in the average expected duration. And using delta method, then we can get the standard error of these estimates. After we get the estimates and the standard error, then conduct like a simple t-test, we can know whether this impact is statistically significant or not. So here are our results. The first row of this table is telling us the average expected duration of the samples. The first 3 columns representing what happens for males, the remaining 3 columns representing the average duration for females. So let's focus on males first. The first cell, 9.87 years, it means on average, a male respondent will stay single for 9.8 years, starting from age 15, before he get married. So this means that male respondent on average are expected to get married by age 25, right? And the second cell, 14.3 years, means once get married, a male respondent in general will get married for, will stay married for 14 years. And lastly, it says that on average, a man will stay divorced or being a widower for 4 years before he enters the next marriage. So the same for female, what we find is that female in Indonesia are expected to get married for the first time at the age of 21 years old. That is 15 plus 6.2 here. And once get married, female respondents tend to stay married for 28 years, almost double the length of male respondents' marriage. And we also find that for female respondents, they will stay divorced or widowed for nearly 6 years before they start their next marriage. So now let's focus on the migration impacts on the expected duration. So as mentioned, we do have 3 measures of being a migrant. So here the 3 rows in red in the right box are the results. And we find that the only statistical significance comes in female single spell and female married spell. And this is telling us that being a rural urban area, being a rural urban migrants at age of 12 will decrease the age of getting married for the first time for female respondent for about 0.2 years. And it also says that once get married, the rural urban migrants, female migrants, tend to stay married for 0.7 years compared to non-migrants. As mentioned, if we regard the traditional view of marriage as getting married early and staying married longer, then having rural urban migrants experience by age of 12 indeed will make the female respondent having more traditional view on marriage setting. And also we find that for the remaining measurement of early childhood migration experience, we don't find any statistic significant impacts. So let's focus on the residence location type. So here, what we see is for both men and women, the age of getting married for the first time is going to be delayed if they were living in the urban area at age 12, or if they were living in urban area in the last year, compared to people who living in rural area. So that actually agrees with Prof. Young's paper, Prof. Young and Prof. Mu's paper, that people from rural area tend to get married earlier and people from urban area tend to get married later. And we also find that as for the marriage, remarried decision, like how long you will stay divorced or widowed before getting remarried. For men, it is the it is the origin place, whether they were living in rural area or urban area at the age of 12, that has any significant impacts. But for female, it is whether they live in rural area in the last year or living in urban area in the last year that is affecting their decision of getting married. So what does this tell us? This tells us that in urban area, Maybe because female have more access to service job and those like jobs where they can support themselves, so they don't need to be hurried to find the next husband to support their life. That's why for females, it is the location type in the more recent years that are determined their attitudes of whether they will that is determine their attitudes regarding the decision of getting married for a second time or third time. And the recap of table 1 is that it is the change of lifestyle following rural urban migration that affect people's marriage decision, other than migration across cities or provinces. But bear in mind here, when we're talking migration experience, we were talking about migration experience in age 12. So even though it seems like we only find two significant points, but this impact is in the long-term one. So it's quite impressive, at least according to me. So why do we not find as such like significant impacts as what we find in China? One reason could be that in Indonesia, government do provide financial support. Therefore, people who migrate out of their hometown may get more financial support. Therefore, the disruption of lifestyle or like all of the distress are mitigated by this fact. That's why the impact is not as large as what we find in China. Also, we find that urban-rural migration experience in early teens have long-term impact on female respondents' marital decision, but little effects for male respondents. So we were thinking this may indicating that women are more susceptible to the impact of migration. So if you have, for female, if they have migration experience in the early teens, then they tend to be more eager to settle down and have set up their own family and have a family life. So now, before I move to table 2, the final recap of table 1 is that when we were focusing on the decision of entering the next marriage, male respondent decisions are affected by their origin place, while for female respondent, it's the most recent location that determines their decision. So now we have table 2, where we're reporting the same results, but we're using propensity score matching. As mentioned, in propensity score matching, we need to be careful about those right census spell. So when we were calculating the age of getting married for the first time, I will exclude everyone who's not yet get married at the end of the survey. And when I was calculating the length of the marriages, I will exclude all the observation where the marriage doesn't end by the end of the survey. And lastly, when I calculating the years of being a divorcee or a widower for men, I will exclude all of those observations who has not yet remarried by the end of the survey. So what we find is that, as you can see in propensity score matching, the 2 effects previously we find significance impact is no longer significant at all. And we find that here, this -5 effect is significant. It means if we were using propensity score matching when excluding everyone whose marriage has not yet ended by the end of the survey, then we will find for male migrants compared to non-migrants, the length of their marriage will be 5 years shorter. So that means using propensity score matching, we will believe having migration experience at age of 12 will lead to shorter, will lead to less stable marriages. And consider that on average, the expected age of, the expected length of a marriage for male respondent is only 14 years. So this means like 1/3 of reduction in the length of marriage. So that's why, as mentioned, when we were using propensity score matching, because we were conducting the research on a very selective sample, that's why it will lead to totally different results. using the same using the duration model. So okay, so the recap of table 2 is that first, when excluding right sense observations compared to duration model, propensity score matching not only claim false significance impact of the migration experience, but it also overestimates the impact. But here, bear in mind, using the results from duration model as the baseline. So yeah, so that's why we were saying it's overstating the impact. But of course, we cannot say the propensity score matching results is wrong, considering that they were done to a different sample, right? Because we have to exclude right sense spells from there. So now, before I start presenting you the results when we were of the impact of parents' education, I would like to spend a little bit of time explaining to you why instead of own education, I control for parents' education instead. So under the framework of propensity score matching, the rule of thumb for us to choose the conditional variable is we have to bear in mind, we always need to choose the pre-treatment conditional variable. Considering that our treatment is having migration experience by the age of 12, that means we cannot include in the propensity score function any variable that is determined after the age of 12. Therefore, we cannot include respondents' own education because from age of 12, one's own education may still be determined, right? So it's not a pre-treatment variable. That's why in propensity score matching, we cannot control for own education. So why do we still exclude own education when we were using duration model, considering now we don't have that same concern? The main problem is under duration model, we also include observations between age 15 to age 23 years old. So between those years, the own education is not well defined, in the sense that the highest education is yet still like time variant, right? So let me use this table to show you again why it would be problematic to include highest education or education at 15 as a conditional variable. So let's think individual A's actual age of getting married is 25 years old. Individual B get married at 16 years old. And as mentioned in duration model, the first step is to estimate a logic model of the hazard rate function. So the outcome variable is whether they stay in the never married spell or they transit out of that spell and get married at each year. Let's look at what happened in age when they were 16 years old. If individual A were to get married at age 25, that means when he was 16 years old, his transitional variable is no. He stayed as a never married individual by the age of 16. So his outcome variable is 0. And for individual B, who get married at age 16, then his transition variable is 1, right? But what are the highest education? Let's just say the highest education for individual A is college graduates. And the highest education for individual B is junior high graduates. So now the outcome variable transition out of never married spell at 16 is in the age of 16, but the highest education variable is something determined, has not yet determined, right? So whenever we were trying to include a conditional variable, we cannot use something in the future to explain something now. That's why we cannot use highest education as a conditional variable, even for duration model. So now the next question is, can we just use the education at 15, like 1 year lag, right? This is before the transition at the transition decision at age 16 as a conditional variable. The answer is still no. Why? For both individual A and B at age 15, they were still junior high school graduates. So now, as you can see, one of them have a transition of 0, the other have a transition of 1, and the education is the same. The age 16 education is the same, but their transition decision is so fundamentally different. Here, because of this lack of variation for education level at 15, if we're using this education at 15 as our conditional variable, the standard error for the coefficient will be so large that disrupt our analysis. We cannot get any results that are stable or accurate enough. That's why we do not control for education at age 15 as well. But of course, we cannot simply forget about education level, right? But what we can do if we cannot control for only education, the next best thing is to control for parents' education. So that's why we include parents' education in the duration model instead of their own education. So now let's talk about the results here. So this is results for the impact of father's education. Each of the row here representing an increase in the education level. So in the first row, we were comparing respondent whose father have some primary school to respondent whose father have no schooling. In the second row, we're comparing respondent whose father have are primary school graduates or have some junior high school level education, compared to those respondent whose father only have some primary school education. So as you can see, all of those 4 comparisons are increasing the father's education. So what we find is that for both men and female and women, when there is an increase in father's education, the age of getting married for the first time is going to be delayed. So your father are better educated, then you will get married for the first time later, which is quite intuitive, right? Like having a better educated father may also suggest that you came from a richer family, therefore you don't need to marry your daughters off or marry your son like so early. You can let them to pursue a little bit like higher education or somewhat like that. The other interesting thing we find is that having higher educated father may lead to shorter lengths of expected duration for marriage spell. What does this mean? This means not only you will get married later for the first time. Once you get married, you tend to, you are not committed to the same marriage as much as you would if you have like a father that are less educated. But if you twist it around, it may also suggest that fathers who were better educated may have an open view regarding divorce. So that's why, like, if you're really unhappy, you can get out of the marriage a little bit like earlier. Now I would like to talk about mother's education impact. So roughly the same pattern. Like we can see that compared to mothers, compared to respondent with mother's education is some primary school to whose mother have no education at all. For the sons, the age of getting married is going to be delayed by 0.6 years. And also we noticed that for better educated mom, usually the children's marriage, expected duration of the marriage will be shortened. So the same thing, right? If your mom is like better educated, then you will get out of that marriage a little bit quicker than those one who has parents who are not as well educated as. So I need to hurry up. The future, so discussion for the future. So right now we focus on migration experience at age of 12. So later, maybe we can consider to study the impact of migration experience at age of 15, because most of the respondents we have are subject to the compulsory school of 9 years. So if we have like age 15 migration, then it will be also closer to the age of getting married, and therefore we can observe some like middle term impact, and maybe there we can find more significant results. And also the next, the other thing we can do in the future is to make use of the employment history. The only problem is that the annual employment history for each individual is only available from 1987 to 2015. That means we have to exclude observation before 1987. But with the employment history, we can also control for whether people working or not in the previous year, and whether they were self-employed or private workers or working for governments. And we can also control for employment sector. Therefore, those conditional variables we believe are more closely related to the marriage decision. So maybe there we can find more results. Okay, so to wrap up the conclusion, we find that rural urban migration experience before the age of 12 postpone the average expected age of getting married for females. And we also find that compared to migration status, whether the respondent living in rural area in the last year or at the age of 12 plays a more deterministic role in the length of how long their marriage will last. And lastly, we find that having parents with higher education level in general delays the respondent decision of getting married for the first time, but at the same time decrease the length of their marriages. So that's all for today. Thank you guys so much for bearing with me. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Bin.
Thank you
For
so
the
much.
very informative presentation. And I think we have already got some questions in the chat box. And I think Professor Liu Haoming and Professor Nina has already left. So I will just start with their questions first, and then we will ask those in the audience who are still here to ask the question directly, okay? And so based on Professor Guyan's question, and so basically the decision or the action of migration has been largely endogenous, and so like she's wondering whether or not there are some systematic differences between those who do migrate and who do not migrate in terms of their socioeconomic and demographic profiles. And secondly, for Professor Liu, is whether or not this migration during early years, during teenage years, will affect their migration at a later point. And so probably you can get started with these two questions first.
Okay. So, yeah, okay. Let me think about Prof. Jin's comments first. Do we observe the same thing? Internal migration are more educated. In effect, yes, if I was not wrong, I do observe that compared to those who are non-migrants, according to provincial level migrants, those people who move across the province at age of 12 are more likely to with parents who are higher educated, but they were using parents' education instead of their own education. So I think Prof. Nina's comments, yeah, I should do the same thing. Instead of focusing on the difference in the parents' education, maybe I should compare their own education, see if this has, okay, yeah, let me do this.
Better understand the mechanism.
Yeah, for Prof. Haoming's one, yes, I haven't done anything like what he suggested, and I should have. Because later when I have migration experience at age 15, maybe I can compare whether having migration age at age 12 will affect their decision of migration at age 15 or age 18. Because by age of 15, the migration history, the migration decision may still be more closely determined by the households heads, like their parents. But by age 18 or 23 years old, their migration decision are more likely to determine by themselves or their own family decision, right? So yeah, I need to, I haven't done this. I should have. Yeah.
The presentation score, right? Got feedback, get improved. And so, Xie would you like to ask questions in person?
Yes, thank you, Xiaochen, for the very informative presentation. So my question is also a bit related to Prof. Lina's question. Is like I'm also concerning about like using their own education and own employment status. But you mentioned that some of the learn are still in school, therefore we cannot use their education and employment status. So I'm curious, like what percentage of them are still in school, and also like the average first marriage age in Indonesia.
Sorry, like first question first. You mean you want to know how many of them were still in school, right? Yes. So I don't have the number on top of my head, but I can give like a general description. For most of our respondents, they are subject to 9 years of education, compulsory education. So, but at the same time, in 1997, the attention rate of senior high school is 18.7%, even though the compulsory school stops at junior high school, right? So that means by the age of 18, in 1997, 87% of the 80% of people, 80% of the respondents are attending senior high school. But whether they graduate from senior high school, I have to double check. And even though senior high school, the penetration rate of senior high school is good enough, somehow once we go to college education, it drops intermediately. So with that being said, so from age 15 to age 18, then at least 87% of those who were born who were 18 to 15 years old by 1937 are still in school. But as you can see, yeah, Prof. Prof, you have to.
Just want to add the gross tertiary education enrollment in Indonesia is around 24%, actually about the same as China. So between 15 or 18 to 20 some years old, definitely there's still some people attending school.
Okay.
That's all.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah.
And also the age of the average age of the first marriage in Indonesia.
Average. So average age of first marriage, right?
Yeah.
So for this, because in our sample, we only know the average expected age. For men, it's 25 years old. For female, it's 21 years old. But bear in mind here, we were having every observation were between 15 years old to 16 years old. So when you are asking average age of getting married for the first time, usually we will do it by age group, right? So different age group will so we can capture cohort effects. But for that complete information, I don't have it on top of my head. Yeah, but
again, the statistics is, because it's a Muslim population, they have very young age. According to this 2019, the man's age of marriage is 19. Woman, it says 16. I don't know if that's correct or not. That seems really young, but there are a lot of child marriages still. Even 12 and 13. Xiaochen has also checked those numbers. There are those kind of things, but definitely the age of marriage is definitely much younger than that in China. And so I think 15-year-old is the appropriate age to start the analysis.
Yes, thank you. That answers my question. Thank you.
So I think we have 3 sets of questions in the chat box. And time-wise, how about we collect all the questions and then Xiaochen, you can incorporate and process a little bit and then answer. Okay. And so now let's have questions from Vincent, Senhu, and Jiushi.
Okay.
Thank you, Xiaochen.
Thank you.
I think no doubt the research is very strong, methodologically very robust, and the models are very convincing. But I'm trying to think in terms of the conceptual and theoretical contributions of the research. So my questions are in some sense quite general. The first question I have is, it's not intuitive to me. What is it exactly about migration that accelerates marriage timing? I know you mentioned lifestyle changes and so on, but how exactly does this happen? So that's my first question. And my second question is, now the results are interesting, right? Marriage accelerates marriage. Migration decreases the age of marriage, and which in turn increases the longevity of the marriage, and people are staying longer in the marriage, especially for women. I'm trying to situate and position this, in terms of whether the literature on migration or the literature on marriage, what do you think is the conceptual theoretical contribution of such a finding on any of these literatures?
Okay.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah. So again, this refers back to what's that? Lu Yao's 2020 paper. They find that migration will have short-term impacts on psychological distress. So when you were having distress, for female, that may correlate to in the family, in the origin family, maybe you will be unhappy with your parents or your siblings. So then because you were unhappy, you want to find change your life, right? So, but for female in Indonesia, other than finding a job, the next alternative is getting married. So maybe this is why they were getting out of their own household and setting up their own marriage. But later, as they mentioned, there is no middle-term impact. So once they get married, maybe they already get over the psychological distress following the first migration. So that's why it doesn't necessarily affect the decision of ending the marriage, but because they already get married earlier, so maybe that's why they what we observed of their marriage age will be slightly longer. Yeah. But yeah, of course, I should focus more on literature, on the mechanism itself. Right now, I only have stories, but it's just purely guess. I need to find a way to test those theories. Yeah.
Hi, hi, Xiaochen. Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. So my question is whether it is able to, for example, distinguish and compare different kinds of migration, for example, rural to urban, urban to rural, and from rural to rural, and urban to urban. So so my question is that instead of creating 3 different independent variables, and whether it is possible to, for example, create one single variable and compare each type of migration to non-migration, then you can also compare the coefficient of different kinds of migration, which you already have very different consequences for marriage.
Yeah. In the very preliminary results, the one I presented at ICSA last year, 2018, we do have 4 types of migration, as you mentioned: rural, urban, urban, rural, and rural locals and urban locals, those people who never migrates, right? And then we compare them one-to-one. And we decided to put rural urban together here because in the end, we find that both rural urban and urban rural do have lifestyle change. So that's why we put them together so that we can have more significant results. But now in the hindsight, maybe I should, check. Maybe even within those who migrants, I need to be more careful to examine whether their attitudes towards marriage will vary. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like.
Thank you.
Then the other problem is now if I were to do this for rural urban migrants, I already have 4 groups, and then for province level migrants, I have 2 groups, and for county level migrants, I have 2 groups. Then the comparison might get a little bit. Yeah, I need to think about it and how to see how to adopt my comparison, choosing different baseline group. Yeah.
Jushi, I think you have some questions.
Yeah. Sorry. Thank you, Xiaochen. This is an interesting study. I think my questions are mainly about to clarify the modeling and then the result. And let me raise the first question. For the marriage spelling, you find the average for men is 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's among those who have the who are married but also got divorced. That's the average. Am I right? Or this refers to all men who got married?
Yeah.
Which is the case?
In fact, when we're referring to expected age, average expected age of average length of a marriage, we refer to every respondent getting married or not. Like,
oh, okay. So this is the population level, like every man is supposed to have 15 years duration.
Yeah.
Well, I saw this number is a little bit too small. Can you compare this to the census estimation of it? I mean, averagely, Indonesian man will have an average duration of 15 years. That looks like a little bit small for me. For, that means from 15 to 50 years, men are supposed to divorce twice, right? If you have 15 years as duration. Please double check. Okay, let's go to the modeling. When you do this duration modeling, I know this is from economics, but for sociology, we also do this duration modeling. What is your underlying distribution for time, for the tau in your modeling?
Sorry, could you explain?
Can you go back to your modeling formula?
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe not. Maybe I should close this one.
At very beginning, I believe, yeah.
This one, right?
Yeah, this one, yeah. So please teach me about this.
Okay.
So okay, this sounds like I mean, of course, according to the formula, I feel like X actually kind of assumed to be proportional, the role of X, but the underlying tau IG is representing the underlying hazard distribution of the risk. Am I right?
No, tau ij here refers to the calendar year.
Yes. That's time. Yeah, the time. Yeah. Okay. If it is time, then please tell me that how this underlying distribution is assumed, or this is non-parametric. Like you do not need to care about the time distribution of risk. Or this is non-parametric.
So tau here is just calendar year.
Yeah.
Because like, for instance, I need to know in year 1990, what are your, where is your location, right? So year 1990 refers back to the transition rate. I need to know how old are you. So that's why I need to find this starting point of your observation.
Oh, okay. So that means tall indicate the year rather than time itself.
Yeah, time itself is.
Oh, okay, okay, okay. Yeah, all right, all right. All right. I now understand. Okay. The last question. Sorry. For the as Jean just commented, let's say cases that you have kids like get very early marriage before 15. So that means instead of right censoring, you also have life truncation.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So have you did anything to think about this issue in estimation? Because that's also bringing bias.
Wait a minute. So here, because if I was not wrong, I only trained 1% of the observation who get married before age 15. So the remaining one, the observation I use are all complete history. None of them were left censored. So yeah, so I don't need to have a different set of duration model captured, like say, instead of left censor, instead of fresh single spell, I use left censor single spell. I don't need that. But
no, I'm not talking about left censor. I'm talking about left truncation. So your survey actually start from 15 years, right? So you don't have any information about people who get married before it. So it's truncation, not censoring, right?
No, so I have complete marriage history. So for everyone, I know.
Oh, okay, okay, yeah.
Married for the first time, and each marriage, how long it lasts. Yeah, just like I chose to exclude everyone who get married for the first time before age 15.
I see, I see. There you have. I see. I got it. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I always use truncation and censor like intertwining, so maybe that's causing the.
Yeah,
okay, that's fine.
So we do know that there are people who married before age 15. Good. We know what proportion that is.
Yeah, yeah.
It's fortunately not very big.
Okay.
So that's that. And divorce rate, Muslims do have high divorce rate. And so their length of the spells in the first marriage is indeed possibly not very long. But let's check again if 15 years is accurate or not. I think that does sound a little short, but they do have divorce, very high divorce rate.
Yeah. Bear in mind, in our results, they were expected to get married at 21 years old. So after they get married for the first time at 21 years old, plus 15, they were about like 36, right?
Oh, and also we stopped at age 60.
Yeah, so that's why.
Yeah, we stopped counting at age 60.
So, yeah, so that's why maybe it will be shifted a little bit downwards. Yeah.
We have fully used our time, and so thank you everyone for the very fruitful discussion, and thank you Dr. Bian for this wonderful presentation.
Thank you guys so much. I got a lot of things I need to work on. Yeah.
Thank you everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.